started to write down these stories, but he changed the stories around because he wanted to create a monotheistic religion out of pluralistic, whatever you call it, polytheistic culture. And so he created this god called Tupa, who was the great god, the superior god. But he kind of made it up so that he could teach the Indians Catholicism. So whether there really was a Tupa that the Indians believed in early 1500s, or whether Anchieta just made it up, who knows? Because these things went through all these interpretations, and you don't really know how true to the source it is.
How many of the stories do we have sources for in a language other than Portuguese?
Yeah, there's the Vilas Boas brothers, and I think in the early 1950s they went to the Xangô reservation. Xangô, I think Xangô River is like about here, and they lived with the Native Americans, they learned the languages, and they wrote down the stories. So their stories, I think, are probably pretty accurate. But, you know, the older stuff from sources, you know, hundreds of years ago, who really knows how much they understood of the Native American languages, or whether they just put their own slant on it.
But these stories are still alive and well and being told in modern Brazil, in Portuguese today.
In Portuguese, these stories are told in Portuguese, yeah, and then of course there's the Native American stories that are told in with the Native American communities in their own languages. And
well, are there stories that are unknown to the Portuguese speakers that are only known in the Native American areas, and some that are shared?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stories that I mean, these tribes have been isolated, so there's a lot of stories that
translations yet.
No, that are just that only the Native Americans know among themselves. Sure, I mean, there's these two brothers. I mean, the reason why we have the books from them is because they were linguists and they lived for I don't know, 20, 30 years with these people. One of them is Claudio Vilas Boas. Vilas Boas, Vilasboas. 2 words, Vilas Boas. Claudio Vilas Boas.
Could you just do a little description? You left Saci out of the story.
Yes, and I did that on purpose, Saci, because that's for another lecture.
Okay.
Because I have another lecture on tricksters, and he's my trickster guide. Yeah, and then all the stories about the let's see, the turtle, he's a trickster, and the fox is a trickster, and that's a whole other lecture. I have another lecture about tricksters. I have another lecture about animal fables. So that's a whole different category. Yeah. I do storytelling for kids, and I have puppets that I made, and I have kids make things out of clay and do little books and all kinds of activities. So,
It was mentioned about the women being demons possibly, and you said the witches were afraid of salt. Anything about the demons or boogeymen being afraid of iron?
I didn't come across that. Have you heard that in other stories?
In other stories.
From European stories?
About iron being okay.
No, I'll have to look it up. I didn't know that. Yeah.
A student of Freud's, Ernest Jones, I think he was, wrote this wonderfully long essay called The Symbolism of Salt. And if you haven't looked at that, I would encourage you to look in there, because you could probably find some connections that would explain the salt in this.
The salt, yeah. Well, one book said, well, it's because the witch is afraid of water, and the salt is from the sea, so she can't have anything to do with salt.
Well, remember in The Wizard of Oz, of course. I don't think.
Yeah,
In other cultures, salt, I think in Celtic lore also, salt is a protection. It's been a protected thing for many years, but salt was very hard to get
Mhm.
in the early days. And so it was very valued, and it was a preservative, so.
Yeah, and people bring salt, you know, when you move into a new home, people bring you salt. And that's a way to ward off the evil spirits.
In Japan, they have a little thing of salt by the door, which again is a folk belief.
Yeah, there's all kinds of folk beliefs and superstitions here.
Where do they bring you salt when you have a new home?
Where?
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, I have a friend who's German from the Rhine area, and when my husband and I moved to a new house, she brought us salt.
Well, I've seen it happen in this country too, so I just wondered if you knew where the custom came from.
Yeah, I think probably the salt and the witches, and it keeps away the evil spirits.
I'm sure Ernest Jones mentioned it
Yeah, I
in
have to read
his.
the book, thank you. Yeah.
People in Brazil who are from the Umbanda and Candomblé tradition, they used to put water with coarse salt behind the door when you receive a guest that's not very welcome, but you have to receive anyway. So when the guest leaves, first of all, that helps to keep the visitor goes faster. And when the visitor goes and you throw after the visitor, and the person probably is not going to come back. Either because she saw that you threw it, or it makes it not really work.
Yeah, I mean, you could write a book about all these superstitions in Brazil. I mean, there's just so many.
You burn salt in a saucepan. Your gas is outside, because Brazilians have this habit, they just pop up in your house, right? So you're like, okay, come in. So then, I'm Brazilian, so then you warm up the salt. Learn that's very important. Then you warm up the salt, and a little while, then the person, okay, so I'm leaving, bye. So okay, then you throw away your salt. So and so many traditions with salt.
Yeah, like one thing, and this isn't the salt, but in Brazil, people have by their front door the snake plant. They call it Palo de São Jorge. And it's supposed to bring good spirits to your house, right? As people enter.
And ward off the ones that are not good, Because São Jorge is Ogum, it's Orixá in Brazil, so that's a representation of his sword. So that's what that means.
Yeah, he's the warrior.
Yeah.
I didn't get into any of the stories from the Orixás and Candomblé, and I mean that's a whole, and again, it's a whole other lecture, I mean, there's so much. When I looked at all these stories, and I'm thinking, how am I going to break this down and make it sort of cohesive and make sense to everybody? Because there's so much material, and you can divide it and analyze it and categorize it in any different way you want. I mean, you could do something about salt, and you could do superstitions, and you could do with the Orishas, and you could do tricksters, or you could do entities of the forest, and you could break it down regionally and tell stories only from Rio Grande do Sul or wherever. There's all kinds of possibilities, and I have a lot of material, and I'm getting more material all the time, and the internet has made it easier than it used to be. I mean, I can get things, websites, and I mean, I just typed in Google Lives Urbanas, and I got all this stuff. It's amazing. So you can just collect all kinds of things, and you can specialize in one kind of story or another, whatever interests you. So.
Well, I'd like to ask everyone to please join me in thanking Deborah for sharing the books. I encourage you to continue the conversation with some reception goodies out in the hall, and we invite you back on November 20th to see Michael